Good evening. Cordial welcome to SIX, to the convention point for everybody who is here in person. Cordial welcome to our visitors online. My name is Jochen Dürr. I'm the Chief Risk Officer of SIX and also a member of the board of the SFI. And I'm very pleased that we can hold the second event in that forum about cybersecurity after what I believe was a very successful first event about a year ago. We do that in the usual format, together with the SFI, together with the Swiss Risk Association. And that cybersecurity continues to be an important topic as a CRO, as practitioners in academia, is something that I guess I don't need to stress. When we designed the program for this evening, we thought about hopefully an interesting mix between practitioners, between academia, founders. Also, we want to have a discussion panel after the presentations. So I hope we can provide you with some interesting 90 minutes of program. And afterwards, whoever is here and has time, we would like to invite you also for a little aperitif here in front of the room, so that we can also exchange thoughts in an informal dialogue. With that, I don't want to keep the speakers any time longer, and I would like to hand over to Sandro Schmid. Sandro is a founder and board member of the Swiss Risk Association. He will lead us through the program tonight, and he will also moderate the panel discussion. So, Sandro, please, over to you, and I wish us all an interesting evening, insightful speeches, and good discussions. Sandro, please.
Thank you very much, Jochen. That was a nice introduction. And also a very warm welcome from my side. I have the pleasure to walk you through tonight and give an introduction to our speakers. We also will have a panel, so get ready for good questions for the audience. And as you know, maybe what is the reason for this kind of events we're doing here? We think that there's no strategic advantage for any bank not to be equally informed in respect of cyber risk. And obviously the institutions have different strengths and sizes, but at least everyone can come here tonight to such an event and get the latest information on how to protect today, how to get ready for in the near future in respect of cyber risk. And we also want to give you deep content on what's going on in the near future so that everyone has the needed information. So from the agenda, maybe we can go one slide further. Oh, I'll do it myself, super. There you go. We'll start with cybercrime as a bizCase. So for those who are in the topic, everyone knows obviously that cybercrime is no longer just some spare time activities in a cellar somewhere far away from here. This is a big business and it's well organized from governments, from huge institutions where thousands of people are remotely working together to attack a company. And Tom will give a speech on this case. Then Alex from SIX will give us an overview of current threats, what's going on just right now on a rather technical level. We then have a speech from Laurent. Unfortunately, he's not here due to a small accident he had, but he will be remotely connected into the room, and he will give us a view on cybercrime and the impact on financial market and can you price it and how. And then we are moving on with future threats. Two more topics. One is the quantum computation, which will be presented by McKinsey, by Stefan Schorsch. He's also remoting, dialing into tonight's event. And then at the end, last but not least, we have Greg, just flew in from New York for this event. He's from Ireland, and he will give you an overview on deepfake and AI and what the future risk might be and how to defeat them. We then have the panel Q&A, which will every speaker be again ready for your questions. So let me introduce you then to Tom. Tom is from EY. He's a consultant in the cyberspace and has more than 30 years of experiences and more of 20 years of practical information security, cybersecurity, and cyber risk management. He also has extensive experience in cybersecurity and cloud projects, just to name a few. Further, he's in the TPRM, or third-party risk management, and general IT audit and consulting services for national and international clients active, mainly in the financial service industry, but also in the industry sectors. In addition, he's also academically active. He's a lecturer at the Mass in Cybersecurity at the University of Applied Science in Lucerne. So Tom, may I ask you to come on stage? The floor is yours.
Genau. Thank you very much, Sandro. Also, a very warm welcome from my side, and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to give you some insights in the cyber business. So when I got the call from Sandro with the request, how has those attacks developed and how has it evolved from just hacking for fun, for fame, to real big business? And I think it's quite impressive to see how this has evolved over the last 10 years. And I'm making that up with an example of ransomware. Obviously, I assume most of you are familiar with ransomware. It's quite often in the press. And that's a really good example how big business in the cyberspace and with the cyber criminals have developed over the last couple of years. So if you just look at the evolution on the right-hand side here on the slides, the first modern ransomware we have seen in the wild roughly around 2005. So it goes back quite a long time, more than 15 years, that this was coming up. Obviously completely different to what we are facing nowadays as a risk. And you also see the evolution, how many different types of ransomware samples have been found. It was in 2010, 10 years ago, when we were talking about 10,000 samples of ransomware around. Already 5 years later, in 2015, we were talking about more than 4 million. And this obviously evolved, and what we see nowadays is really targeted attacks. So it's also called the big game hunting, so really targeted to juicy targets where you can get a lot of money out of that. It started more on the private space with small amount of money, and nowadays it's really big business. We see also some of the revenues that have been generated with ransom later on, and nowadays it's really an affiliate network of threat actors working together, reusing some of the tactics, techniques, and procedures from each other, and therefore being really successful then when coming together and bringing together all those specialized skills. Obviously, when we look at how you can get infected, it's mostly that either you have a drive-by download when visiting a web page and your system gets infected, or more often even with emails. Fraudulent emails, you're clicking on it, you get infected, so the endpoint at the end, where is quite often the initial phase for such a ransomware. As said, it's more and more organized. We see a lot of activity starting basically back to 2018 when this became more and more common, and not only asking for money after encrypting some of your data or of the data of the organization, but also asking for money to not disclose the data that was copied away before it was encrypted, or copied away while you got the key to decrypt it. So nowadays the business is multi-extortion, not only for one ransom, for several ransoms, and the actors, they went even the route that they figured out which companies have an insurance and which insurance companies are willing to pay ransom as part of their coverage. And they knew if they attack such companies, the likelihood that the ransom is paid is even higher, as if you don't have an assurance, for example. Here is another example for a famous group, attackers group, Lazarus, with advanced persistent threat. So it's called a North Korean group, hacking group, with developed remote access Trojan software and ransom software, and quite often just weaknesses in our systems are misused to spread the virus, to spread the malware that is going to encrypt your data. So it starts with one system, and then it's spread throughout the network based on known exploits that are around for specific system. It can be a Microsoft server, for example, Exchange server. We have seen quite a lot of different weaknesses over the last 2 years, and if the systems are not patched, the weaknesses are used to spread the malware within the company. So not only the data is encrypted directly, which is relevant, but maybe also many other systems are going to be impacted by that. Just looking at the ransom that is going to be paid, obviously, the first advice you always get when you're getting hit by a ransomware, don't pay. With the payment, you're funding, obviously, the criminals, and they will continue their work. That's easier said than done. Quite often, the companies don't see another opportunity than to pay to get back to the unencrypted data. And we see that also in the numbers that are generated at the end. So in 2020, globally, there is an estimation that $20 billion have been paid in ransom, which is a significant increase from a year before, where it has been 11 billion. So a doubling in 1 year. And we have seen a lot of ransomware activities, obviously. And also many Swiss companies have been impacted and affected by that. One of the ransomware groups, Ryuk, generated in a month's time, or over the time around $1.3 billion. They have been active quite a while. And they have really took a lot of money out of that. If you just look at the Revil group, they earned in October 2020 roughly $90 million only in 1 month with ransom. Even if you pay ransom via Bitcoin, you still can follow that trace and you see how much revenue is generated on a specific Bitcoin wallet. Even if you don't know exactly which person is behind that wallet, you still see the transaction. That's the way as the cryptocurrencies work, that you have integrity in all your data and that it's clear where the money was going, but you don't know necessarily who is behind that wallet at the end. There have been also, as I said, they are working together nowadays, the threat actors. And there has been a disgruntled ransomware affiliate of the Conti gang. And they were such disgruntled that they have disclosed the manuals they have been in place or that are in place to conduct such ransomware attacks. So you get the insights, the tactics, the techniques, the procedures of those gangs to understand how they do that, and all the steps that you can see here with the Conti ransomware tools are all the steps they are going through when attacking a company with ransomware, and there are a lot of tools, obviously, that are used. Some of them are specifically programmed for that service. Others of that is just the reuse of a system tool, which is really difficult then to detect in the security operations center activities of the firms that are getting attacked, for example. The attack journey of a ransomware quite often is divided in 5 stages. So you have initial access and delivery. You need to get in a system. That might be a fraudulent email. That might be a drive-by download from a website. After that, they want to reach the persistence in the network. They want to make sure that they can come back to your network. So a connection to a command server, a control server, they can come back to you, and they starting the lateral movement, so the spreading of the malware in the network. That's the lateral movement piece. Then it's about privilege escalation, that they have more access rights on the systems. The higher the access right, the better it is to reuse also system tools, which are hard to detect, as said. And then obviously the ransomware impact starts, be it that they starting with copy over sensitive data, that they can extort the company because of data disclosure, but then also starting the encryption of the data. And then obviously the negotiation. You will get contacted, asked for payment of bitcoins within a certain time frame. If you don't pay, just the money or the ask of bitcoins is rising, and it gets more expensive and more extensive until they might disclose then some of the data. So that's normally how it works. So it's fast-paced, and obviously you get contacted and quite often negotiation is happening. As I said, nowadays those companies are really specialized. There are a lot of service providers. Then there are companies or attacker gangs which are focused on distribution of that malware. And there are others which are specialized in monetization. So how to get the money back out of the Bitcoin network in real money and so on. And the collaboration of that is really the difficulty and makes this kind of attack such successful, as they are highly specialized, they are collaborating and combining their skills. That's another overview of different threat actors, which are in black here, using some of the attacking tools and ransomware and how they are collaborating. And therefore, as I said, you have seen the figures. It's really big business. It's not just for fun. And therefore, it's dangerous for all the companies to get victim of such attacks. And the likelihood that you get impacted if you don't have a sound cybersecurity set up in your own company is rather high nowadays, if it is really targeted. I'm at the end of my presentation. In the slide deck, you will also have appendix. Then you will find some more information and what you can do against some of the different stages. But hopefully that gave you impression. There is big business, there is a huge collaboration, but they are also fighting against each other, those groups. And it's a real threat for most of the companies nowadays, and a perfect example of how the big business is done nowadays in the cyberspace. With that, I'm handing over to the next speaker. We take questions in the panel or already now in the panel? Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Tom. And I think if we plotted the attacks and the money that went into these attacks for the last years, we have a strong curve going upwards on both sides. My feeling is we are far away of having a kind of a curve going slow. So this is a topic that continues. All right. So with great pleasure, I'm going to introduce you now to Alex. He's working for the SIX Group, not that long, but he has over 20 years of professional experience within the cyber security industry, whereas in the last decade he helped build and grew a cyber surveillance company for law enforcement and digital intelligence agencies. He has been speaking on different conferences and consulting on cybercrime and trends and techniques for Interpol, Europol, and others. His main focus on developing innovative exploits and techniques to intercept communication of criminals and mobile phones and computers. Since May 21, he is now working for SIX to build an internal offensive security department, which means he's the nice hacker going inside, outside into SIX and trying to get or to find the best way to hack them. So very warm welcome. The stage is yours, Alex.
Thanks. Great. Thank you, Sandro. Welcome to all of you. My presentation will focus a little bit more on current threats, especially from a perspective of a financial institution. I split the topic a little bit into two parts. One will be how do we get to this point, where are we now, and why is it so difficult to detect or prevent those attacks, and which are the main attacks that are being executed at the moment. On the other hand, I want to give you two small examples that recently happened, and yeah. First of all, how did we get here? I mean, it's very clear, increasing digitization. We have it everywhere now. I mean, your mobile phone, business, work, everything is IT related. Especially COVID didn't make it, let's say, better. It just helped, not only it helped businesses, it helped individuals to be connected 24/7 basically. But it also means that you have to stay on top of the game. You have to be connected as a business itself. So there's a big evolution going on, and it will never stop, but we saw in the last 18, 24 months it increased massively. When we talk about, okay, increasing digitization, it also means, on the other hand, okay, the attackers need to become more sophisticated because we have much more security. I mean, when I think about 6, how we sent everybody home, obviously it was very hard to increase the security inside 6 so that we prevent us from getting attacked, basically. So attackers themselves, they need to be more, let's say, creative. They need to find ways. And it's a very expensive business, not only when we talk about ransomware, what Tom explained, but also in general. Attacking computer systems is not cheap. It requires a lot of knowledge, a lot of manpower, and takes a lot of time. Normally, those with those complex attack vectors, they are basically made of organized crime. It's a huge business. It's $1 billion business. Besides that, we have state-sponsored business. I mean, everybody talks about it when we think about North Korea. It's how they basically get money inside the country. So, but there are others. I don't want to name and shame, basically, but obviously it's very, very clear who those state actors are. The others, I wouldn't target them or I wouldn't consider them as a main threat, especially for big corporations. But as individuals, obviously, you might be a target of those. Nevertheless, what are the current threats? Obviously, these attacks become more complex. You have more money involved. And Tom was already mentioning ransomware. It's a huge attack vector. Yet, as you know, I mean, businesses try to protect themselves. So they come up with even more complex ways and intelligent ways and creative ways of actually getting you infected with such ransomware that Tom mentioned. Because normal antiviruses, they usually prevent those kind of attacks from working. So it comes to supply chain and third-party compromises, which I think is the biggest threat in the next 3 to 5 years. If I want to target you as a business or as an individual, I'm not going to target you directly because that's very likely to fail. Every vendor, every business has security mitigations in place. So what do I attack? It's very hard. So as an attacker, what I'm trying to do is, I'm not trying to target the big man. I'm trying to target someone outside a circle. So this is where third-party attacks come in place. That means basically, you can think of it when you receive a spam email. You are very security aware often. You know that doesn't look legit. So what are you going to do? You just delete this email. But these attackers, when they try to attack, they will attack, for example, an app that is installed on your phone. So they're going through app stores. They are going through software that is already on your computer, which makes it really hard to detect because there's either no user interaction involved. You don't need to click anything. You get the updates automatically. Like your browser, it automatically updates in the background. So why do I not attack that? Obviously, Google is a bad example because they're very, very secure, basically. But you have hundreds of apps on your phone. If I hack one of those or compromise one of those, send an update out, you won't even know. And this is the dangerous part. And I'm always telling Jochen, this is why it's so important to focus on some recovery programs, because you cannot prevent those attacks. It's very, very, very difficult. The thing is, you don't know what you're looking for. And if you don't know what you're looking for, the chances are very unlikely that you are going to detect them. So it's a massive, massive, massive threat. We have other threats that are being used often, distributed denial of service. If you render a service unreachable, let's say you're using Microsoft products for communication or WhatsApp. I don't want to take the Facebook example from last night because it's not a good example, Facebook, WhatsApp, because it was not that attack. But the impact is the same. The service was not available. Facebook, WhatsApp. So the attack was different, but the impact is the same. You will not potentially conduct business deals because you rely on WhatsApp. You just think it works. And it always works, you think, but it doesn't. So if you render certain services, online services unavailable that you rely on, you can have a massive business impact. May it be communication, may it be collaboration of documents, whatsoever. Big threat, and obviously you need to prevent those attacks from happening. Another big topic, cloud security. I took cloud security in particular because everybody's using it. Every company, everybody says, yeah, here, Azure, AWS, Amazon, everybody's doing cloud services. Normally, I had the discussion recently with Jochen about, okay, yeah, but the brightest minds are working on it. And it is per se, it is very secure, but you can have a slight misconfiguration error might cause massive impact and might make documents available in the cloud that you don't want to be available, might bring the service down, could be anything, or attackers could break in. So even though it might be as default, it's a very secure technology, it can also have a massive impact if not configured properly, or if you do something you were not supposed to do with it. So, before my time runs out, I just want to give you 2 quick examples about recent ransomware. I mean, ransomware, Tom mentioned it already, how this supply chain attack and ransomware becomes such a powerful topic. On the weekend of the 4th of July, obviously nobody is working in the US. So a ransomware group called Kaseya, which is a Russian ransomware gang really, infected one company that basically provides other companies with IT management solutions. They have hundreds of thousands of customers around the world. So as you would never attack those companies directly, they targeted them with a zero-day exploit, which is it's a vulnerability that nobody knows about. So they basically hacked into this company, changed the software, distributed it to all service providers. These service providers pushed these updates to all the companies. All of a sudden, hundreds of companies were infected without them actually knowing and nobody working on it. So who's going to fix it over the 4th of July weekend? Fortunately, in Switzerland, as far as we know, nobody was affected. But obviously in the US, Sweden was massively impacted. And as of today, and I think this still stands, it's the biggest ransomware demand in history at approximately $70 million for one attack. It's a good pay for a weekend, I would say. This confirms the numbers Tom was already mentioning earlier. Another example that I quickly want to mention is the cloud security. This happened recently, about 2-3 weeks ago. It was dubbed Oh My God, or Oh My God, where a researcher, out of the blue more or less, published a vulnerability inside Azure, so Microsoft's cloud service, which in particular, or in certain circumstances, Microsoft issued these virtual machines, these cloud machines to its customers. And basically with this, you introduced a vulnerability to your company, which could happen to anyone really. It was a very, very, very trivial vulnerability. So I'm really, and the security research community is really surprised that nobody found it before that. But it had a massive impact because basically without any technical knowledge, you could overtake hundreds and thousands of cloud machines, what was hosted on it. We don't know. We still don't know the exact impact that happened. But interesting enough, Microsoft at first said, we're not going to patch that one. Obviously, the media became aware of it, and then there was a huge pressure that was put on Microsoft. So they then obviously rolled out something to the customers. But in the end, this is a perfect example. At first it was abused and used by ransomware gangs, by criminals of all sorts that wanted to mine cryptocurrency whatsoever. But it really highlights the risk-reward trade-off of cloud services. They are secure, but they can pose a massive danger because they are not fully under your control. So yeah, this is a little and very brief introduction into current threats that we are facing now, not only us, but I think every business. And thank you very much, Sandro.
Thank you very much, Alex. So now our technique is demanded. I'd like to introduce you now to Laurent. Laurent Frésard is a professor of finance at the University della Svizzera Italiana and holds a senior chair with the Swiss Finance Institute, the SFI. Oh, there he is. Hi, Laurent. Can you hear us?
Hello.
It works perfect.
Can you hear me?
Yes, absolutely. Okay, I'm just introducing you. So Laurent holds a PhD from the University of Neuchâtel and was previously a professor at the University of Maryland and Paris. Laurent's research has been published in leading academic journals and has received several high-profile grants and awards. Laurent is a regular speaker at academic and practitioner events worldwide and serves as a consultant and board member for various companies and foundations. So he will give us his speech about can we price it or not, the cybercrime in the financial markets, if I may summarize it like this. So Laurent, you're not on stage, but the time is yours now. Thank you for that.
Thanks a lot. So I'm very happy. Thank you. I'm very happy for the invitation. So I'm going to talk about big data and big risks, and I'm just going to give you some of my thoughts. I'm absolutely not an expert in cybersecurity, but I'm going to try to use some of the knowledge I've developed in financial economics to try to shed some light on some of the issues that have been discussed so far. So, I mean, as you know, we are now in a world where we have a lot of data. So this is just, exploding everywhere as a result of many different things. So this was mentioned by Alex, result of digitization. And usually you've heard that a million times. Big data represent a huge opportunity. So if you combine massive storage with computing power that we have today, very good algorithm, think about AI, for instance. And so what you get is a lot of new insights and improvement in efficiency. So from an economic perspective, so that's the hope. This will lead to productivity gains and potentially economic growth, and it's a good thing. So now, naturally, because data is an input in this new technology, the economic value of data is increasing. And so now you've heard that many times, data is the new oil. And so, yes, it is the new oil, but as oil, it's also risky. And I'm going to try to develop a little bit on that. So now, if data becomes more valuable, of course, the value of malevolent activity related to data is also going up. That's mechanical. And it's something that Tom was mentioning, the intensity of threats, the materialization and the dollars involved, the economic value of that is going up. So if you think about data thefts, ransomware, manipulation, I'm going to coin that cyber risk for simplicity. So there's a lot of financial losses, there's a lot of geopolitical problems, so this creates instability. So we have lots of headlines on that. So I think one thing that's important to remember, from my perspective, is that there is a hidden social cost. And to me, the social cost is that this could slow down the massive adoption of data-driven productivity. So why is that? I mean, if you have a lot of threats, you're going to have a loss of confidence in big data. So if you think about increasing cyber risk, it lowers the net benefit of investing in technology that's related to big data. So potentially, at the level of economies, it could affect the efficient allocation of resources. And so this would mean that we all pay the price. Not only the companies that are affected, but socially speaking, if we slow down the adoption of these new technologies that are very promising, this could be bad for all of us. So now, as a financial economist, I'm going to just imagine for a moment that you are an investor or you're an asset manager. And I'm going to give you a bunch of considerations that might be worth thinking about. At least those are the ones that I do think about. So the first one is the following. So when I look at asset managers these days, and I do consult for some of them, on that topic specifically, what we see is that most of them are increasingly using alternative data. Right, so they realize that data is very powerful to try to understand risk and returns. So they start using data from social media, from geolocalization, satellite, credit card, you name it. So investors are increasingly relying on this data. Banks do the same. And so if they use that in their models, so this will lead to correlation in trades and positions, conformism. Everybody starts doing the same thing. It could be fine. So now, this potentially poses a problem. If I'm a pirate, so if I'm a bad guy and I really want to create havoc in markets, one thing I could try to do is to manipulate this data. So this is something that Alex was mentioning before. I can try to access the data, either manipulate the data, change the data, or I could potentially deny access to this data. If that's the case, I would not be surprised to see instances of small flash crashes and extreme volatility on markets increasing over time. So when talking to some of these asset managers, I don't have the perception that this type of risks is really on the radar. So I think they're more in the race of trying to get access to the best data without necessarily thinking about the potential threats that this could create. So this is something that I would care about as an investor. So now more generally, if you think about total investors, like big diversified investor, one question that pops up is, do we care about cyber risk? Maybe we don't, because it could be diversified away. I think the answer to that question is not anymore. As the two presentations before highlighted, so cyber threats are increasing, and so they are touching most corners of the economy. So I think the days where you could sit back and think about cyber threat as something totally idiosyncratic, these days I think they're gone. And so cyber risk is becoming systematic. So now this is good and bad. So the bad thing is that this is really becoming big. The good thing is that financial markets could potentially price it. If this is becoming systematic, they should be associated with a premium, a risk premium. And once you have a risk premium, you can start doing things like hedging, managing, potentially minimizing the impact for your portfolio. So an important question is that the case? I mean, we believe that this is becoming systematic. Is it priced? And if it is priced by markets, first, is it priced correctly? Is it priced well? And how expensive it is? Okay, so how much as an investor should I be willing to sacrifice in terms of returns or in terms of volatility in order to bear or to avoid this cyber risk? So now, this is a question that many academics have looked at very recently. So there is at least 4 or 5 studies by very high-profile academics in the US and Europe. So they look at large scale, analyzing thousands and thousands of companies, and the answer to the question of whether it's priced, the answer is yes. So the way they do it, let me briefly summarize the way they do it. First, they try to measure for a given firm whether a specific firm is exposed to cyber risk. The way they do it, it's challenging. They analyze firms' disclosure. So they're going to look into annual reports, earnings calls, management discussion, and so on. They're going to use text analytics, simple or sophisticated natural language processing, and then try to classify firms as, highly exposed to cyber risk versus, weak exposure to cyber risk. And then they're just going to compare risk-adjusted returns for these type of firms. And so what they find across different studies, I'm just giving you a summary here, is that there is a significant and pretty large return differential between high exposure to cyber risk and low exposure. So now, in terms of economic magnitude, it's roughly across studies between 5% and 10% premium annually. Okay, so there is, a significant cyber risk premium. So it's pretty big. So the question that is not answered yet is whether this is priced efficiently. So now, my intuition is no, clearly no. And the reason why my intuition is no is that information is extremely patchy. I mean, if you try, even for Swiss companies, to try to understand how much they spend on security, what kind of system they have, whether they have an insurance or not, and so on, you will have a very hard time. So there is, a very clear lack of disclosure. It's all over the place. So it makes it very difficult for markets to price that. So another reason why it's probably not priced efficiently is that from firms' perspective, they might have an incentive to cover up hacks and ransomware. This is less and less the case. But in the past, there was massive cover-ups, which makes it difficult for you and I as investors to figure it out and try to put a price on this. Okay, so now we've established, at least others have established, that there seems to be a cyber risk premium in markets. So now this means, and I think it has important implications. So this means that cyber risk is costly for firms, even if they've never attacked. Okay, the simple fact that they might be threatened will have an impact on companies. So now, some implications. Implications for investors, it's good in a sense that there is a price to that risk, because then they can start developing realistic strategies. You cannot really manage what you can measure. And so having a price, even though this is not necessarily precise, is a first step that enables you to include that in your portfolio, or at least in your selection. So now you can start evaluating cyber risk budget. How much you're willing to sacrifice, how much of your future performance you're willing to allocate to try to mitigate this type of risks. So now, there's a bright side to that, I think. So it also has massive implications for firms. So if you're an exposed firms, so what you're going to see is you're going to have an increase in your cost of capital. So now this increase in your cost of capital could be a bright thing, because it could accelerate the challenge. So it means that it will potentially lead the company to lower this extra cost of capital by taking actions, by taking steps, by increasing investment in security. It could also make massive investment in talent and so on. So now the good thing, if firms start to do that, just because this risk is priced by market, it could be beneficial for society, as I said before, because potentially it can accelerate the benefit that we could potentially reap from massively investing and using this data for productivity. So now the one thing that is always on the agenda for an economist is whether this friction or this risk creates misallocation. And so we don't have a lot of evidence, but there's one study that I just would like to mention. This is by a friend of mine, Jérôme Tarr, and a co-author. And so they look at whether, in a very simple study in the US with lots of companies, they look at whether cyber risk affects the M&A market. And the reason why I talk about the M&A market, because this is one event where capital is reallocated between one company to another, potentially for better usage. And so what they do find, and I think it's interesting, they do find that firms that are more exposed to cyber risk, they participate much less in M&A. And what they do document, and this is because of data integration problem. So when you do an M&A, they're going to be integration of different systems, different types of data, different platforms, and this is exactly where vulnerability comes. And so firms seems to factor that. So they participate less. They participate less to this market. So low cyber risk firms are much more expensive. So there is a risk premium that is materializing on the real asset markets. So market reaction is much more positive when you see transactions between firms that have low cyber risk. And so this superior performance, this extra performance of low cyber risk has increased over time. So this is probably consistent with better information and the better ability of the market to price this risk. So now it's a pity, because M&A could be one way to create value by reallocating assets. But what we see here is that because of cyber risk, some of these transactions do not take place. And so this could act as a barrier to efficient resource allocation, which would be costly, in general for society as a whole. So let me conclude. So I could go again. I could go on and on. There are many other aspects of cyber risk that's related to financial markets that are worth looking at and discussing. But I do believe that there are many implications for financial markets. So market mechanisms can help address some of the real costs of cyber threats. So this is one of the benefits of having good markets and good institutions. So there are various remaining concerns. One is there could be various risks hidden in dark areas of markets. Alternative data could be one. There might be others that could be interesting to think about. I do believe that we need better disclosure. We need better reporting standards. If we want to price cyber risk and try to start managing it from the perspective of investors, I think we do need better disclosure. So I think this is exactly where academics could be useful, and I see more and more developments coming, and I think this is good. So stay tuned. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laurent. I don't see you anymore, but it's a very interesting view on looking on cyber risk, and for all the cheeses out there. So there's a return for you. There's not just a business case for the hackers, it's also a business case for you. So Laurent, thank you again, and hope your toe is getting soon better. Now we have the next dial in from Stefan Schorsch from McKinsey. Let's see if that works out too. There he is. Hello, Stefan.
Hello, good evening.
You are online in the room. It works well. We can see you and hear you.
Fantastic.
I'm just about to make an introduction of yourself, and then I give you over the microphone, so to say, the hybrid one to you. So Stefan, as mentioned, is from McKinsey, has a background in engineering and a PhD at ETH in mathematical research group with Professor Mazzotti. He joined McKinsey into digital banking practice in 2013, and he serves as in the capital markets infrastructure and on the bank sell side in Europe and Middle East, and he loves combining technology and capital market topics. And we also know that he lives in Zurich with wife and 2 kids. So glad you're here, and I'm looking forward to hear about your view on quantum computation. So you can start. Thank you.
Excellent. So thanks a lot. And maybe actually moving directly into the topic. I actually found the last talk quite fascinating. So this one is then rather going to be about the question, how do we even build secure financial markets themselves? So not even at the stage of pricing in the cyber risk, but building those markets. And I think the focus of this discussion is a little bit further out. So say quantum mechanics and quantum computing has not yet arrived, but we are now at a time, and given the time frame that we typically require for building capital market infrastructure is probably worthwhile already now considering. I think the focus of this is really, that's the first point here, on digital securities, and by that could be cryptocurrencies, that can also be tokenized cash equities, that can be digitally issued bonds. All of those that are then based on DLT, digital ledger technologies. I think there's a huge embracement in the community about the benefits you get in terms of fungibility, in terms of efficiency wins, in terms of just like a democratization basically of access to those capital market instruments. So there's a strong positive note. They are all more or less subject to being based on strong encryption. And strong encryption in terms of we require the capability to do prime number factorization. And that in turn has a built-in security mechanism mostly around dependency on high computational effort required to solve this. So only if you have a very fast computer, you would be able to crack this. Now for today's computers and today's used encryption standards, I think it's fair to say that those are pretty safe. We have some high-level estimates then on a few slides down the road, where we actually see that we are talking here a very long time frame. So that is safe for now. However, the logic of a quantum computer in terms of how it calculates, how, say, quantum bits are interacting with each other and not like traditional bits separate by each themselves, allows actually for some fascinating facts of how to solve these equations significantly faster, by faster talking dimensions and really exponential factors. And there are a few algorithms that have been mathematically proven over the past decades even to be apparently able to be working. And there's a double-fold risk then to those. There's actually on the one side the risk of simply decrypting those currencies or those digital assets, and then actually you can manipulate them, you can actually take ownership, you can start transferring them. That would, for example, come from Schorsch algorithm. It's not so new, actually, it's 1997. Or also the other risk of flooding a digital currency or a DLT-based network with very, very cheap tokens. There's, for example, an algorithm called by Mr. Grover from 1996 even, that could be used theoretically. Now, of course, this is still a theoretical discussion at the moment. This is far out. Those computers don't exist yet. But what is pretty sure is once those computers arrive, we will have a massive inequality, unlike today where all more or less have access to similar x86 architectures or similar computers that may be like a factor 10 or factor 100 faster. I think the first quantum computers, because of the physical dependency, cooling for how complex they are to operate, will create a very unequal, non-democratic access pattern. And then, of course, you have a problem because you cannot encrypt your assets with the same technology that other people have for decrypting. So I think now when we are now building actually the capital market infrastructure for the next decade and for probably parts the decade afterwards, looking at how long timeframes in the post-trade industry in general are, is actually now a good time to factor in those technology developments already now. And there are a few methodologies, and we're going to get to them in a second, what can be done. I think it's no need for panic immediately, but it's something to have on track, especially as this infrastructure is now being rolled out. Now, there's of course a question of when will those developments actually take place. I tried to get to the most common metric for how advanced are we in terms of quantum computing. This is a number of qubits that are stable, and we are roughly now about 100, give or take. There are a few companies that have already claimed quantum supremacy for very specific problems. Google, Xinhua, and you actually see literally everyone is spending big money on pushing development forward on this topic. And the experience with traditional computing has been that this follows an exponential curve. So far, the qubit curve is also pretty exponential. So we can try to estimate that around maybe the year 2025, now COVID had an adverse effect, so probably it's shifted by a year or so, but around that time, we are probably facing quite powerful quantum computers, and they are not then fiction anymore. So this is actually great for everyone who's calculating risk models. And coming back to the previous talk, so very fast Monte Carlo simulations, but I think for the purpose of encryption, that will be a problem. For the sake of time, let me skip this. So today's encryption on a private public key format, for example, creates a very long digit, say above 1,000 digits, very tough to crack. A very fast classical traditional computer with this type of encryption would probably take 1 billion years or so. So we are pretty safe. Now, a quantum computer with a sufficiently high number of qubits, probably around 10,000 or so, at a significant reduced tech rate, would probably take less than 1 minute. I mean, this number is, of course, not a scientifically proven fact yet. We don't have those computers yet, but we can safely assume that this timeline will significantly be shorter. The other algorithm mentioned before, the Grover algorithm, what could lead to this type of flood mining and then kind of inflate selected protocols quite quickly. Now, what can we do against that? I think there are a few measures, and some of them are actually already in place today. So it's almost like the rollback of DLT. We can use quantum encryption. This is not based on a quantum computer. This is simply a symmetric encryption where you use quantum coherence and a fiber cable between sender and receiver, and no one can actually connect to this. Otherwise, you would notice this. So this we can do today for very selected use cases that has been demonstrated in capital markets already, for example, for issuing settlement instructions. So maybe actually in Switzerland already today that could work. SIX is quite centrally positioned, right? So you could build cables to all the banks. I think at a global scale, we are looking probably at a below 5 years time frame when this technology gets wider acknowledged. And then I think, as we said, if we move further to the right, we probably approach the time frame where an RSA 1024 encryption can be overcome. So we could actually move to RSA 2048 or other stronger encryption protocols on the traditional side. So just making this computational problem much more difficult to crack. That can also work for a while. And then at some point, probably everyone has access to a quantum encryption capability. So probably we have overcome this. Now, this, looking just at the time frame, there's a little bit of a fairly far out vision, but so very practically, I think the immediate risk is probably a little bit overstated. I've seen a lot of articles actually in strategy projects that we have accompanied for various infrastructure providers in recent times been faced with this question. So I would still say going for digital securities is a absolutely right step, and the benefits outweigh the risks that these introduce. I think it is fair to say when this quantum computing power is available, we will face this disbalance and the de-democratization. So we need to find a way to overcome this as a joint capital market community. And so then looking at the mitigating measures, I think for now this is mostly actually a very careful choice of technology that we more or less hard code and put into place that can actually be on the DLT protocol side to make sure that we can exchange the encryption algorithm along the way. It's not uncommon for those protocols that we basically need to create a fork and basically exchange the entire algorithm and then work on the new one. Or we actually go back to the permissioned networks if you want. So the quantum encrypted, quantum coherence type of solution, or we actually need to bridge the time with just much more complex encryption problems that also a near-term quantum computer could not solve. Indeed. So I think that's my key message, to keep this in mind, not overstate the near-term risks, but keeping this in the back of when we design all those solutions, and I know those are being rolled out globally.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefan. It's a fascinating topic, quantum computation, so will be a hot topic in the next years to come, and for sure there will be many questions on that in the panel. So now we have the last topic, which is also an amazing topic. It's about deepfake. And it's with great pleasure I can introduce you to Greg. And Greg is the CEO of Inferex. Oh, thank you. I can still talk about quantum. There you go. And Greg is actually 18 years old, and he's the founder of Inferex. But nevertheless, he has almost 15 years of coding experiences in AI, Python, and Java, which is not bad, I must say. After winning the 2021 BT Young Scientist, which is the same competition that John Collison, who was actually the CEO of Stripe.com, he won the same prize in 2005. Greg founded Inferex this year with the ambition of increasing the global impact of AI. Aside from the Young Scientists, he has been also awarded 10 other prizes for projects in AI, including from Stripe, Bell Labs, Intellectual Ventures, and Sigmund Hacks. And he's going to tell us about deepfake. Really looking forward. Greg, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much. Yeah, a little correction, 10 years of experience, not 15, that would make me 3. Yeah, so I'm Greg. I'm going to be talking to you about the risks of deepfakes in business, in society, in government, just pretty much everywhere. So my background starts when I was about 5. I got my first access to a computer. It was for my birthday. My parents had bought me just a small PC. And almost immediately I was hooked. I was playing video games. For 2 years until I turned 7, I started programming video games. And that kind of evolved from there into simulations, and basically the simulations were games that I wasn't playing. And that naturally evolved to AI, where it was something else playing the games against me or for me. And that's where everything spiraled out of control. I entered high school, where I found that the BT Young Scientist was just this annualized way to put months and months of effort into a project or some sort of research that would then be seen by like-minded individuals. Of course, the prizes were good too. So I entered 5 times. The last time I entered was this year, and that was by far the most successful entrance. It was the one I worked least on. It was like 3 months of effort, whereas the others were like 9 to 11 months of work in the year. But I won the competition overall, and that was like just completely changed my life. It was for a project on detecting state-of-the-art deepfakes. And from there, I got, like, within a month, I had job offers for ludicrous sums of money. I was 17 at the time. There was one job offer for $200,000 a year. It's like, don't offer that to a 17-year-old. It will go to their head. Anyway, I turned them all down. But I did use them as leverage for my parents to allow me to drop out of high school and say that I wasn't going to college. The reasoning being, why would I go to college? It would be to get a job. If I already have job offers, it's probably not useful. But we'll see whether that was a wise decision. Anyway, after the competition, I was inundated with emails from investors saying, like, we know you have ideas, pick one, go with it. And so I decided to found Inferex, which is just an AI infrastructure startup and not the subject of this talk. I raised funds, and this year has been absolutely amazing. But on the deepfake side of things, I managed to develop deepfake detection technology for a European defense contractor. I've advised the Joint Research Center for deepfake policy and the risks for Europe there, and as well as some talks around Ireland and universities and stuff on like the journey that I've been on, which is not good for universities considering. Okay, so let's get into it. What are deepfakes? So deepfake as a word is a portmanteau of deep learning and fake, where basically you use deep learning to generate fake videos of someone saying or doing things that they would never say and do. You're thinking, how the hell would that relate to risk, considering we've been talking about quantum computers and encryption protocols? Well, this is the more human side of risk. I could take anyone in this audience and anyone online, just take their name, find a picture of them online, and create some pretty terrible content of them. And let's look at the good examples. This is Tom Cruise, or rather, it isn't Tom Cruise. This is a deepfake of Tom Cruise. It's just a still, but the video that this comes from has hundreds of millions of views online. Fortunately, it's tagged as a deepfake because the creator of the video wanted to make sure that everyone knew it was a deepfake, but I've seen many things that I suspect are deepfakes but aren't tagged. This is likewise not Obama. In this, he insults Trump, which I find very fun, but I'm sure he doesn't. And this is President Donald Bean. You can see that you can have a lot of fun with deepfakes. They're a force for good, but let's go into why they're a force for malice. What are the risks? First of all, geopolitically, you will see maybe an increase in conflict worldwide with the empowerment of bad regimes, mostly by just the generation of propaganda. You can squander political dissidents by creating videos and false media campaigns and things like this on a scale we've never seen before. And remember, this can all be automated as well. Politically, quite relatedly, we'll see this severe erosion of democracy, which is surprising. I didn't know it could erode anymore. In America, we've seen deepfakes of Joe Biden, and I just showed you a deepfake of Donald Trump, and those are the ones we know about. But there are many imagine creating an advertising campaign for your competitor where they are announcing their political views that are just completely wrong. And people get into their heads that they're like, we don't agree with that. And that's there. But the one I'm most interested in is the criminal perspective, for good reasons. Extreme fraud, extortion, libel, non-consensual pornography, and my favorite, the denial of video evidence in court, just simply saying, that's not me, that is a deepfake. So there's two sides of this. Who are at risk? Of course, we've seen celebrities and politicians, but the ones that are most at risk, because they know how to deal with it, right? Celebrities, we don't care whether they get defamed, it's not a big deal. But businesses and entrepreneurs and executives are the highest at risk of the things that I've mentioned, like extortion and blackmail. Even for businesses, we've seen security operations where you can impersonate members of the team and get access to things that you shouldn't get access to. Think of it like in-person engineering, except you are the person. And then everyone is also affected because everyone wants to, get revenge on someone or do something malicious. There's bad sides of humanity. So little small clarifications. Not all deepfakes are bad. I've done a fair bit of fear-mongering here, but they are a force for good. You can revive dead actors and do absolutely amazing things. The same technology can generate art, but you can't ban them. They're an unbannable thing. The research is there. I could go and generate it. There's apps just openly available on the App Store. One click and you've got one. They are easy to make. This was made. This content was made 3 months ago, and now the sentence "will" doesn't evaluate to true. And the timeline for this is very short. That's quite correct because it's been 3 months and now it's true. So, how do we mitigate these risks as a business or as an executive? First of all, awareness. With any sort of misinformation, the most important part of solving it is with the correct information. Everyone in an organization needs to be aware of deepfakes and whether the content that they're consuming could be real or fake, or the phone call they just got from their CEO could be an audio deepfake, and they shouldn't move those funds. So I've seen fraud of hundreds of thousands of dollars just saying, like, send it to this account. It's like, if you get a phone call from your boss saying move the money, you're going to move the money. It's not your boss. Second of all, you need a method of detecting deepfakes before they pose a threat to your organization. This is flawed, but it's better than not having it at all. And eventually this will be absolutely obsolete, as deepfakes will evade these detection techniques, 5 years down the line. I don't know at what point it's hopeless to detect these, but it's definitely going to happen. Then third of all, a response strategy. Once a deepfake is detected, or once we figure out something is going wrong within the organization as a result of misinformation, you need a strategy to deal with it. That could be like a press release, depending on the nature of the deepfake or the misinformation. But you need a strategy before it happens in your organization, or else you're unprepared. So, awareness. That's the most important thing. Everyone needs to be aware deepfakes exist, and what they're doing and what they're seeing and consuming as people need to be aware that could be a deepfake. Otherwise, this will just spread. And that doesn't just apply to business, that applies to society as well as political campaigns. If you see a politician doing something stupid, it could still be the politician doing something stupid, but it also might not be. So closing thoughts. I don't think this is going to be as big a problem as I've let on. This is probably going to be just one of the many evolving cyber threats that we've seen over the past few years. But it's an easily solvable problem. All we have to do is know that it exists, and it gets rid of itself. But you need to know that it exists, or else you're going to have a lot of bad opportunities to send money to people you don't want to send money to. And of course, since every situation is unique, I've left my contact details here. You can message me and ask me questions at any point throughout the next 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg. That was amazing. And still, it just flew in from New York. So even with jet lag, very well done, very refreshing. So we're starting now with the Q&A, or the panel. And there are two formats. So you can ask online. This will be organized. And of course, you can ask here in the room. So I would maybe start with a few questions. Let's start with Tom. I mean, you said everyone will be asked to pay, and you said you should not pay. But then again, they still pay, so I got a bit confused. So shall I pay if I'm hacked or not?
Hopefully, is it on?
No.
Right. Okay, good, thanks. Yeah, hopefully you are that well prepared that you don't have to pay. That would be the best outcome. So the question is, obviously, quite often the question is background, backup data around, and is that recent backup data that you can recover your system from that backup data? That might be an option, and might even take less time than paying for a decryption key, which might take quite a long time to recover the data as well, because it's not that fast normally that you can recover the data. So that's the best option you have. But if you don't have a backup, which is recent, if you don't have that data anywhere and you're really relying on that data as a business, then it's really getting hard to have another option than to pay if you want to continue your business.
So one solution would be a daily backup, if it's possible, from the data.
Yeah, not even, obviously a daily backup anyway, but nowadays we are talking about infrastructure and a meaningful backup. If you can really accommodate that, is have a offline backup which is not connected to your network.
Correct, yeah.
Because otherwise there's always a way that ransomware will find its way also to the backup data and encrypt it as well. And obviously, that's if they find the attackers where the backup data is, they will start with that when encrypting and then come to the other data because they exactly want to make that unfeasible for you that you can recover such a case then.
Good old hard disk to take out and be safe.
There are different options, but we are talking about air gap backups, which is not directly connected to your normal infrastructure, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, maybe Alex, a question to you. So I understood that on the ransomware, meanwhile, this is kind of becoming a retail business, so everyone who's not even trained on this just gets kind of an app and then starts to hack the others. So is it really that bad or is this exaggerated?
It's not that simple. It's not that simple. Yet you can hire ransomware gangs to do the dirty work for you. So if you have enough criminal energy, potentially you could hire someone to do that for you, yes. If you know where to look for, obviously. So it's not like super easily offered on the market, but potentially, yeah, could be done.
But what would you advise now, really, let's say concretely, for the next 3 to 5 years, what should be done now as real threats that everyone should have on the table and find solutions?
Well, the thing is, you can't really protect from it. And you probably never will be, so you have to be prepared. You need to have, especially for ransomware, you need to have proper, let's say, backup strategies. You need to invest in security. But it is always, in history, you could never 100% protect yourself from attacks, and you will never be able to, I reckon. So try to do your best, really. I mean, think about your security and backups potentially for ransomware. But there's no definitive answer to that, really.
Okay. Well, sounds challenging still. I'm not sure, can I also ask questions to Laurent and Stefan? That works, yeah? Okay, then maybe one to Laurent. As we heard that Facebook lost billions just recently, so it's very expensive. But do you really think ever that we can price cyber risks from outside information into the returns?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So I'm not sure. Well, overall, I'm not sure we can price anything perfectly. So I think what would help really is better disclosure of, but of course, if you think about disclosure, it could be a double-edged sword because what's useful for investor is also useful for cyber attacker. So I think there is I'm not pushing too much for disclosure. So I think what will help as well is time. I understand that the threat will evolve, but then as economists, we will have more data points, we will have longer time series. So I think we could develop better models to price this risk. So I'm not directly answering your question. I think we could do better because for now it's still very rough. That's my view on it.
I guess so too. So maybe if you have questions also in the room, you're happy to chip in. Otherwise, I would take the first one from. There's one question here, Yanis.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions. One is coming about when we talk about risk management. Normally, what we do is we know that we cannot minimize the risk to zero. So what we do is we mitigate some of the risk or we hedge the risk. And I'll go to Laurent's, just to pass it to Laurent as well, idea. I quite like this idea of pricing, but I think you should think about, when we talk about pricing, we look on the kind of discounting factor, so go to the risk-free space. But then I think what you do is you put a spread on top, okay? So you try to put this premium. And when you put the spread, you basically link to something like a rating. So you say which contracts are sensitive to risk, which are not, and then you rate them and you put this premium. You have to think about whether you price or whether go to the pricing space or you go to the space of the insurance. So you go and you look what is the probability, what is the impact, and then you hold some capital. So I think there are ideas that you can use from the risk management, existing ideas and techniques that we use in risk management, and you can just try to mitigate, hedge, pricing. But the techniques are out there, so that's. But I'm just wondering, what are you doing on this space? I mean, how you can mitigate and how you can price.
This was rather a comment than a question, I guess.
Yeah, but still, I'm wondering what you are doing so far, because you guys mentioned before that you have to live with it, but I guess you should do something more about it. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, there are different things that you can do. I mean, just let me take that quickly. I mean, I can talk more privately if you want. There are many things you can do. I mean, as an investor, the first thing you want to do is evaluate the cyber risk of your whole portfolio. And you can potentially manage it either by using some new financial products like ETFs that are specialized in investing on the other side, on cybersecurity providers. Okay, this will give you a natural hedge. Of course, it's only valid on the long side. So what you can do on the short side is especially using this exposure measure to try to see how you can short some of these risks to minimize it. So there are different ways to do it. And my expectation is that the financial industry will be smart about it and offer tailor-made products. So that I usually don't do predictions, but I'm expecting this to come.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I'll take a question from our colleagues from the net. So Daniel Kalbermatter asked the question: should you save sensitive data in the cloud at all? So who wants to take this one? I'm looking.
I personally wouldn't. But there are certain cases where it makes sense. So I guess you need to weigh off the risks with the rewards you basically have. I personally wouldn't.
No, okay. So simple question, simple answer. Okay.
So I would have said the same a couple of years ago. So nowadays, I'm of the opinion it rather depends how good are you yourself in protecting your data. And it might be that if you are rather a small enterprise and don't have the specialists that are taking the right measures, that the data you have in your own data center is more exposed to risk than if you have it in a cloud environment where you have a professional party taking care of the risks. So it's not that straightforward. Obviously, if you are capable and aware how you protect your data, then it's fine. If you are not on that level, it might be good to host that somewhere where the people are who have the knowledge to protect properly data.
Would it be fair to say, let's say, as smaller an institution it gets, as more profitable maybe a cloud solution would be, because they are lacking, let's say, the sheer numbers of experts due to the size, and the opposite? Not necessarily mean that only the big ones should go on the cloud, but in principle, could that be kind of a rule that makes kind of sense?
There is a certain correlation to that, not only for cloud services, but in general for managed security services. Because the smaller you are, the more difficult it is to have the own talents within the company dealing of the cyber risks and taking cybersecurity measures. And there is no way that every company is getting the right specialists. So you have to source some of those activities going forward as well.
Okay, maybe let's go a little bit into quantum computation. And Stefan, I hope you hear us. Yes, you're there. So you're quite pro, I would say, for the quantum computation. And as far as I know, there are 4 different technologies at the moment we are discussing, like Google and I think IBM are going in one direction, Microsoft another direction. But then again, Google just recently said we are still far away of having quantum computation in the near future. And then on the other hand, there's lots of money going into quantum computation. Do you think there's an overvaluation of the hope that we are just having such fast computers? Or is it really, does it make sense to invest in this direction?
I mean, obviously I don't have a class here. My personal belief is that we typically overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate how fast things in the mid to long term actually change. And so with that in mind, I would believe maybe the 5-year time frame is a little bit scary and too short term to really be considered. But I would certainly believe the technical problems are solvable. I mean, the fundamental principle has now been proven, so this has actually almost switched a little bit from a scientific problem to an engineering problem. And I personally believe actually the investments made in this technology, given the vast, we've now talked about a very specific encryption type of application, but there are so many more that I think the investment spent on this topic, I personally believe makes sense. And yeah, there are a lot of applications where this type of computational power can support, be it for other scientific research, but also in capital markets, be it, for example, for the risk models that will make the world hopefully safer and more efficient.
Well, sure. I mean, let's say North Korea would have a quantum computer. I think that would be the end of the cyber currencies.
Depends if they are the first.
Yeah, exactly. But
exactly. Probably the likelihood for that to happen is rather low. So
let's see. Yes, please.
Thanks. Question to Greg. What would be your recommendation to protect personal private data? I mean, don't use any cloud service, use paper, encrypt. So what would be your personal recommendation as a visionary person?
I don't know about visionary, but yeah, I mean, on deepfakes, the data that you're trying to protect is your face. And I don't see social media just going like, oh, you can't show your face on the internet anymore. So I think the best protection as an individual is to mature as a society, such as the content of what the person would be creating of you, the deepfakes that they'd be creating of you, aren't as much of a deal or a taboo, so that they don't hold as much of a threat over your head anymore. So I think if society matures and is able to realize that that video of you isn't real, they don't pose as much of a threat to you, so you don't have to pay out some ransom. But there's nothing you can do as a person, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. Maybe then another question from the web. So it's for Laurent. It's from François de Schorsch. He says, in your presentation, you seem to suggest out that the societal value of cybersecurity exceeds the private value. That is, insufficient protection against cyber risk in one organization has negative ripple effects for another organization. As an economist, what remedies would you recommend to bridge this gap between private and societal incentives to address cyber risks? For Laurent.
Okay, yes. That's a good question. So it's true that the way I look at it, and so that's what I said, is cyber risk potentially is costly for all of us. So from a purely economic perspective, this makes it. This makes cybersecurity like a positive externality, meaning that the more secure some firms become, the better it is for all of us, because we can rely more on data to get insights and productivity growth. And so naturally, governments are the ones to intervene when there is an externality, positive or negative. So
I'm not sure if you finished with your question. It's just shut down. I think the second. Yeah, we've been hacked. Well, okay, maybe he will be back again, and then we will continue with his answers. Then maybe we'll go a little bit also into the space of AI. Because you said that you will have a global impact of AI, but what will it be and how and why AI? Tell me more about your, well, you said you're not a visionary, but I think you are.
Sure, so our mission is to increase the global impact of AI. And the reason I think that's a good goal is, so I've seen, my hypothesis is that computers have experienced exponential growth in the past 30 years, but the other industries, while they have grown largely, they haven't grown to the extent. And I think AI is going to be the bridge between that exponential rate of growth in computers and an exponential rate of growth in other industries like agriculture, medicine, and manufacturing. So any sort of infrastructure that is in its infancy or is hindering that progress needs to be revamped, and that's my goal at Inferex.
And if I think this thought through, can there ever be a cyber risk AI that will be hacking all the time, that is just smarter than we all?
Right. Yeah, I think like the big, so top risk analysts in the world give, it was a few years ago, but gave AI the highest probability of an existential risk to humanity as a whole, so destroying every trace of a human. And I think they gave it a 1 in 6 chance in the next 100 years. I disagree. And that risk was based off the existence of a singularity where once AI becomes as intelligent as a human, it grows continually at an exponential rate until it becomes like godlike. I don't think that's going to happen, and I'm becoming more and more skeptical of a scenario like that as I see AI progressing. I think it's, of course, a major risk, and I think the use of machine learning or AI in cybersecurity is going to grow exponentially, is going to cause huge amounts of problems, but I don't think it's going to wipe out humanity.
I hope so, and I agree.
I mean, kill me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, it's too late. But also maybe with the deepfake, and now we have all these VCs, so the Teams and Zooms, etc. Isn't this an additional risk in respect of deepfake if I just set up, let's say, a Teams event with my boss, whatever, and he thinks it's me and I'm discussing with him, and he just gets a Teams invite and he logs in and he thinks he talks to me?
Yeah, that's one way that you can do it. I mean, the only one, I haven't heard of any of them because the evidence tends not to come out, or it comes out very late. One I have heard of is an audio deepfake just over a phone, because that's much easier, and it's, you don't have a team of people looking at the deepfake and you don't have to continue talking to them for 40 minutes. And it was just a phone call impersonating the CEO, talking to one of their finance team guys or something like that, and directing money around. And that's a far easier thing to do than, full video presentation and trying to guess their Google Teams account and all of that.
But as far as I understand, at the moment, I'll take pictures of you or videos. I can make a deep fake, but then I still need some machine power to transform it, basically, with the algos you have in machine learning. But is it already that far that I can simultaneously make like me as another person and talk spontaneously?
Real time.
Real time, yeah, exactly.
It's not too difficult to do it real time.
It's already possible.
They do need specialized equipment like a proper GPU or something like that, and it's far more difficult. If you want to do something like just generating a video, it's one click. But doing it on a live stream where you'll have to be able to match up the features of your face with the deep fakes so that you can control their face. It's a whole deal. It is possible.
Yeah.
It's hard.
There's another question, please.
Thank you. It's just tying in with the last conversation you just had. We've been talking about faces a lot, but in order to do even a fake video, or even worse, a Teams call or a Zoom call where interactive, we actually have to give answers that correspond with what the person previously said. You also have to be able to simulate the voice and do that in real time. Is it just as easy as taking a photograph? Mimicking an Irish accent, for example, or my German accent?
Voice is difficult. We're still kind of in the uncanny valley there. But we can definitely do the video real time. Audio we can definitely do, but it's slightly off and you'll be able to detect it. But the audio that we do have has no problems with accents or something like that. It's just like intonation and we have problems at mimicking other people's accents as humans. Computers don't. They have problem mimicking, stutters and me doing something stupid with my mouth, pretty much. But yeah, we'll get to the point where something along those lines, and I mean very quickly, within a year or two, like that is feasible.
The way to mitigate the audio risk, Alex, would be for us to switch to Swiss German because it needs
Maybe one or two more questions. one here from the screen. So from Calvert Marshall, post-quantum security. So the future ability to use quantum computers retrospectively to decrypt, intercept data is a real risk. Are corporations taking the risk seriously enough? I guess that goes to Stefan.
Yep, this was a good question. I think most corporations I know have been working with use like risk registers, and I think that type of risk probably doesn't even show up, or if so, it is certainly very, very deprioritized. The problem is that those risk registers are very much focused on the next few years, and that actually this future retrospective decryption is probably something that is still further out. So I think it's now maybe more about the time to create awareness for the problem, make sure that that at least pops up in the registers and people are starting to consider also about encrypted data is not safe and should not be flying around, for example, via emails, etc. So that is certainly something to be pushed forward.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think. Yeah.
One more question for the audience. Otherwise, I would conclude. Then again, thanks to all the speakers for dialing in, for coming here, for flying in. And yeah, it was really enjoyable, great input, great insights. And of course, we will have the third one again in 2022, the third Swiss Cyber National event. And I hope you will join us, hopefully still also in person. You're also now invited for a cocktail outside in the name of SIX. So I hope you will mingle around with us, and thank you again for coming, and the audience as well as dialing in, and especially the speakers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.